had a couple of messages. An apology from John Stone, who's a stalwart member. He was a senator, and formerly before that the Secretary for the Treasury, and he's been a regular, and he was a very strong supporter during the referendum, but he's not well and couldn't come. We had a message from Tasmania, from our convener there, Reg Watson, who sends us greetings. Sadly, I cannot be with you. We are, however, planning to celebrate the ascension to the throne of Her Majesty, which took place 70 years ago, an important milestone. And I also had a message from our convener in Washington. Now, you may wonder why we have a convener in Washington. In the last referendum, we had a convener in London, and we still have one. The reason is because of the size of the polling station in London, which is said to be the largest polling station of Australians in the world, because there are so many Australians in London. It's good to have a representative there so that on referendum day we can have somebody or some people handing out something in relation to a referendum. And we're doing the same in Washington, where Greg Copley, who has an office there, has kindly agreed to be our representatives. And he had a dinner not so long ago in honour of the Queen, at which the Ambassador for Australia was present. Anyway, he sent us this message, which I'll try to play.
Greetings to all the delegates to the Australians for Constitutional Monarchy Annual General Meeting in Sydney, Australia. This is Gregory Copley, the convener for the Americas, and I'm stuck in Washington DC, unable to get back to Australia at the moment. But I wish you good luck and Godspeed with your deliberations. This is a critical time for Australia and for the rest of the world. Political stability is questionable at the moment, and we have an uncertain future approaching. We've just seen a constitutional monarchy, Barbados, transform itself into a republic purely on the whim of partisan domestic political machinations. This could damage the future of Barbados severely. It will unquestionably mean that it will be less of a peaceful, prosperous country than it was in the past. The same thing could happen to Australia, as we know from our battles in the past to preserve the constitutional monarchy in Australia. So we must fight now, make bold decisions as to how we're going to protect Australia going forward in this period of political uncertainty. We have to have our arguments ready. We have to bolster the cause of the monarchy in Australia and demonstrate what it has done and is doing for the stability of the country going forward, and how we can endure the transitions in the monarchy in the years to come. I wish you all good wishes and Godspeed in your deliberations, and I wish I could be with you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you at the next annual general meeting.
And that was Greg Copley, our representative in Washington, our convener in Washington. He runs a think tank there, a very influential person, and it's good to have him speaking for us. I would also like to draw your attention to a piece I've written for a newspaper, the Epoch Times, relating to the facts concerning what's happened in Barbados. And that's been published in a newspaper called the Epoch Times, which is based in New York. It's a worldwide newspaper and has an Australian edition once a week. And if you wanted a copy of that, just give me your card or your email, and I'll make sure that when it's available, you can have a copy. There's much more to be known about what's happening in Barbados. It was legislation which went through, very complicated legislation, which went through each house. There's a nominated Senate and an elected House. It went through each house in one day, and it contained provisions which purport to codify the reserved powers. The reserved powers, the powers which Sir John Kerr used, which are used frequently in relation to the dissolution of Parliament, the appointment of Prime Ministers and so on, usually without any public disfavour because it's all done in accordance with protocol and tradition. But sometimes it reaches the news, as Ken Handley mentioned, when a Governor-General, for example, or Governor dismisses the Prime Minister or the Premier. But they've got provisions codifying the reserve powers. During the move to a republic, Gareth Evans, the former Labor Attorney General, set about on a task of attempting to codify the reserve powers. After some time, he threw his hands up in despair and said it was impossible to codify the reserve powers, to do it properly. They did it in this document. I've glanced at it. I think it opens up the possibility of the president becoming more than a nominal president. There's a potential there for dictatorship. But as I say, it was done without scrutiny. No scrutiny at all, rushed through. The lower house, all seats in the lower house were won by the ruling party, believe it or not. Once they'd taken office, there are only 30 in the house. Once they'd taken office, one of them then resigned from the party and became an independent and took the office of leader of the opposition, which attracts more money and some prerogatives and so on. So it's a very, very cosy arrangement. The leader of the opposition expressed some caution about the change, but then voted for it. He quoted some anonymous lawyers saying it was dangerous, didn't name them, but as I say, voted for it. The situation is bad. When the government came to power, the financial situation is appalling. The ratio of government debt to GDP is the worst, the fourth worst in the world. Soon after taking office, the government defaulted on the Eurobonds, and notwithstanding the Prime Minister's obsession with republicanism, she managed to get through a recommendation to make her father a knight, which shows you the peculiar behaviour of some politicians. But there is this danger, and in the background, there is communist China exercising an inordinate influence by lending money and taking control, and there is the possibility, the likelihood there, of a new colonial relationship developing, not with the old colonial power of the United Kingdom, not a benign one, but one with a dangerous genocidal power, that is Communist China. Anyway, I put that into an article in the Epoch Times. If you want to see that, you can just, it's there already. Oh, good.
They said they did it with permission. I don't know whether
Certainly have my permission. It's implicit. So anyway, if you want if that's not enough, do let me know. It's also, you can get it, if you just Google Epoch Times, go to opinion, and you'll find it there in the list of opinion pieces. We're now waiting for our next session, but we must wait for Craig Kelly, so let's have a little brief interval until Mr. Kelly arrives.
I might bring attention to one thing that's recently happened in Canada.
Sure.
I'm not sure if anyone's aware, regarding Barbados transitioning into a republic. There was a motion put forward in the House of Commons in Canada where some politicians were wanting to put a motion in to congratulate Barbados in transitioning into a republic, where a very large number of members of Parliament in Canada refused to send their congratulations and ended up singing "God Save the Queen" in the chamber. So I thought just if whoever wasn't aware of that, now you know.
Yes, I saw that it's reported in a London monarchist publication, Royal Central or something similar to that, but they make the mistake of saying that they sung the British anthem. What they sung was the royal anthem of Canada, as God Save the Queen in Australia is not the British anthem. It's when it's sung here, it's sung as the royal anthem. That's what it's stated to be in the proclamation. It is proclaimed as the royal anthem of Australia. It was proposed, the motion which they rejected was proposed by the Parti Québécois, which wishes to secede. They want Quebec to secede from Canada, and it was in French, and they wanted a unanimous resolution, and that's where the Conservatives started singing God Save the Queen. The term of the motion was not just to congratulate, it was to congratulate Barbados on the equivalent in English, was in French, congratulate Barbados on ditching the monarchy in the English version.
Unlawfully.
Yes. So we'll. Are there any other matters before Mr. Kelly arrives?
Talking about what do we call it? The royal anthem.
Yes.
Don't we? Yeah, because on 2GB I haven't been in the car. Can you hear it? Is it on? Yes. Oh. And on 2GB the other day, I was in the car, and anyway, they were talking. It was a Sunday afternoon, I think, and they were talking about the national anthem, and then it's something I gather the Prime Minister's office sent something to say that the Advanced Australian Fair was our national anthem, and the other was known as the Royal Anthem, and if the Queen was here, it was sung. So then they said, I wonder whether it's sung elsewhere. So I actually phoned them up and I said, yes, when we have special ACM, Australians for Constitutional Monarchy functions, we sing the Royal Anthem, don't we? Because we sing both oftenly.
Yes.
And also to it, is it the Commonwealth Day at Parliament? Our dinner at Parliament House, I think we've sung both.
When we can persuade the committee, which has a lot of Republicans
anyway,
on it, that's the right thing to do. That you raised an interesting point. The draft of the proclamation, which went to the Executive Council, had the effect, and the Governor-General noticed this, it had the effect of making the singing of the Royal Anthem outside of times when the Queen or members of the royal family are present. It suggested that it was not lawful otherwise to sing God Save the Queen. That went out in a press release from the Prime Minister's office before it went to the Executive Council. The Governor-General noticed the error, and if you actually go and look at the proclamation, you'll notice the minister, he was a Labour minister, changed it by hand so that it is quite lawful to sing at any time. The suggestion, the Governor-General said, do you mean this? Do you mean that it would only be lawful when the Queen or a member of the royal family is present? And I can't think of his name. He was a minister in the whole government. Ninian Steve was the Governor-General, and the minister was a South Australian. I can't remember. Anyway, he then said, no, we don't mean that. So it's changed by hand, and it's initialed by the minister and the Governor-General, and then signed by the Governor-General. It shows how, on a relatively... Yes, checks and balance. It also shows how a Governor-General, a good Governor-General, a good governor, can correct mistakes or excesses in the process. I think I should go and ring Mr. Kelly to see if he's coming. I'll do that. Excuse me.
I'll just like to ask a question of Ken with regard to what David has just said about the Governor-General, Sir Ninian Stevens, picking up that legal point. And my question now is, should a Governor-General and a governor always be legally trained or a former lawyer, QC, as opposed to some of the Governor Generals we've had, the governors we've had.
Heaven forbid. It's very important that the Governor General and Governor be drawn from anywhere in the community with the required gravitas to hold that office and do it on honourable service.
Thank you.
Did anybody else, while we're waiting for Mr. Kelly, did anybody else have any questions they wanted to ask, or any statements or any opinions they wanted to express? Okay. We'll always come up with something. We'll improvise. Maybe you can pretend to be Mr. Kelly. Yeah, mate, yeah, there you go. I think you'll be outnumbered there. Like that's when your security guard is needed, sir.
Well, I don't know where Mr. Kelly is, but I would invite Sean, Burke and Warwick Stacey to come, as they're the other members of the panel, and we may continue considering other relevant matters concerning Australians for constitutional monarchy. And could I suggest that we might consider two things? Firstly, and Daniel has a view. Yes, you might as well. Yes, please do. There's steps on the side there if you want to. If you go around the back.
Don't fuss. Thank you.
Not at all. Daniel has some excellent ideas about what we should be doing in relation to the celebration of the Jubilee. And perhaps, Daniel, you might remind us what you were saying to me about the things we should be doing. The dinner and the medal and...
So, and I would love... This could be to the panel as well, and to...
No.
Not...
2 days, I think, in England.
I think it's 4.
4 days in England. 4 days. So what Ken and I were discussing earlier before, and he actually came originally up with the idea, so I'll have to give credit to him for that, was to celebrate also the Platinum Jubilee, or the 70th year of the Queen's accession to the throne, was to do a gala dinner here in Sydney. That is also being done in Melbourne, so we thought it's a good idea for us to do a gala dinner here in Sydney, and could be collaborated with the Britain Australia Society. So that's something that we'll I'm sure Professor Flint will keep in touch with the ACM group about, and if that goes ahead, it would be lovely to see everybody there, I'm sure. Another thing that, there's also the medal, and like I said, there could be a multi-faith service that could be done, whether that's in the city or in all capital cities in Australia. That's a good possibility, that's a good chance for everybody to unite and celebrate that. And another initiative which I found very interesting that's happening actually across the United Kingdom at the moment is plant a tree for the Jubilee campaign that's being done. I found it interesting because it's a good way to get the young kids involved, local primary schools, high schools, councils. And what it essentially does is organisations such as councils and schools, workplaces, parliaments, they create a map online of the whole country, and every time you plant a tree, whether it's a native tree or whatever tree you like, you register it onto that website, and it pinpoints that a tree has been planted there. And what happens is, once it keeps going and going, the map starts to show all these pinpoints where trees have been planted in honour of those 70 years. So what I had brought up in our last executive meeting was that is something that we should really, really look into, because I think it's an excellent way to get young kids involved, schools, councils. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Yeah, it's exactly right.
Can I suggest another thing that might be useful is to make a documentary, and I would do it in two interspersed parts. One which is a brief decade by decade of what the Queen and her family were up to, but the flip side that would be just before and after each of those is what's gone wrong in republics around the world, each of those same decades. And I would make it at the junior high school level so that where we get that into schools to show this is the stability you have from a monarchy, and this is what's gone wrong in so many republics around the world over those 70 years.
Just working off that point, which was excellent, that you made a documentary, that's an excellent idea. But I was asked about a month ago why I had a personal belief that the monarchy was the best system. And my first argument was, again, what the majority of people say, and the main point that people come up with is, if it works and if it's not broken, why fix it? And the gentleman that had posed the question to me was just about to say, oh, that reason isn't good enough. Don't you have one based off statistics? And I actually did. There was a research conducted by The Australian about 2 months ago. The Australian newspaper had found that the top 5 democracies in the world, so the top 5 democracies found in the world were all constitutional monarchies. So all 5 of them were all constitutional monarchies. So that shows you something.
We used to do this in our Facebook. I gave up doing it, but whenever some statistic came out, we found that the majority of states, whether it was the best-run state, the state least indebted, the state with the highest standard of living, even the happiest states, always the constitutional monarchies came out disproportionately better, because there are a smaller number of constitutional monarchies in the world than republics. And we always top all of those lists. Not all of the positions, but a disproportionate number. I think less than a third, well less than probably a sixth of countries in the world are constitutional monarchies. It may even be smaller. But we did it all mathematically and found that whatever list you came to, constitutional monarchies were always better. There were a couple of republics that also did quite well, Switzerland and Finland. The Swiss model is impossible for anybody to copy. It's a brilliant model, but it is so complicated. It's so specifically Swiss. It's very hard to copy. It also has a very healthy dose, I think, of direct democracy. And I think that the politicians in Switzerland are very wary of the people of Switzerland for that reason, because at any time they can initiate a referendum, which I think that's the reform we should be looking at rather than other reforms. But always in every area. I remember during the referendum campaign, I was invited to speak at a Liberal Party meeting. It was a branch meeting. I thought it'll be the usual dusty School of Arts, and it'll be nice and cosy. It was held in a flash hotel at Potts Point. It was a served dinner in a very nice building, and during the course of that, I was invited to speak, and a Republican was invited to speak, and I quoted that statistic that the best countries in the world, from the point of view of various statistics, were constitutional monarchies. Well, I was met with laughter and derision from a heavily Republican Liberal branch. I think it was the Paddington branch of the Liberal Party, inner city branch, therefore Republican. And then I started citing the statistics. I went through all of them, and they went quite quiet over that, because it is an overwhelming statistic. No matter, whenever a statistic about countries comparatively ranked comes out, the constitutional monarchies seem to do better. Now, various Republicans try to give reasons for this. I don't think they're persuasive. I just think that it is an effective system of government.
David, you're right. I cited some statistics on infant mortality back in March, a survey, and is this not working? Oh, that's better. And without exception, I mean, every one of the top, the lowest infant mortality rates on this graph was constitutional monarchies with the least amount of child deaths, and Republicans were, didn't even rate in the top 10. That was quite incredible.
Could I ask, just going back to the tree campaign, could I ask the panel and anyone in the audience as well, do you think this is something ACM execute themselves, or do you think this is something that, in your opinion, would need a government stamp of approval in order to be sort of a bit more authoritative in that sense?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your question.
So in terms of the tree campaign that I was talking about before, in terms of planting a tree in recognition of the Jubilee and creating sort of a nationwide campaign for that, do you think that this is something ACM could execute themselves, or do you think it's something that the government will need to do? And not just the panel, how do you all think?
I think the government would need to be involved because they have the influence through, say, the schools, public schools and high schools. So, they're already fairly keen to plant trees as an environmental thing. And if they're going to be encouraged to do it because of representing, Queen Elizabeth, then some sort of media or some sort of information has to go through the system. So I would suggest that would be a good idea in some way. And the funding, exactly, because it would require a bit of money to keep this publicity. On funding, I did think of the idea of putting together a little magazine, because when you have a colour brochure magazine, then it's something people keep for even decades. So, I've got magazines with the Queen's face on the front for women's weeklies from the 1950s that I managed to find. So people do keep these things as a heritage, collectability, and they're easy to keep. They don't collect dust. You can file them away in a bookcase or somewhere, because you can't really rely on the Women's Weekly or No Idea magazines to present a very comprehensive look at Queen Elizabeth's life. But just on finishing, there's a wonderful book that I picked up in the UK called Elizabeth the Queen, by Sally Beadle-Smith. And I can't tell you how informative that book is in terms of representing her contributions to world peace, to so many things. It's just impossible to summarise them. That's a really good book. But yeah, a magazine, but that would require funding.
My natural instinct is to exclude government if possible. I'm from the media, and some years ago, when I was working in magazines, we sowed some seeds into the pulp paper of the cover of a magazine, and encouraged kids to tear the cover off, screw it up, dig a hole in the ground, throw the cover into the ground, and it grew. The plants grew out of the cover of the magazine. So there might be an opportunity to work with a media organisation. With something inventive like, bury this magazine and a tree will grow, and then register. It's just, where I can, I try to avoid involving government because it always becomes more expensive and clumsy. If we can excite a nationwide organisation, news organisation or media organisation, that might be possible.
There has been some considerable criticism today and for some time over the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles. Perhaps here he could make a positive contribution. Perhaps we should write to Prince Charles with the support for your proposal, and perhaps we might, when we have a meeting of the executive, we might ask you. It might be good to have a fresh face, a young person, writing on behalf of ACM to the Prince's office, just suggesting that he support it. Now, a message from Prince Charles to a Prime Minister of Australia may carry some weight, rather than a message from ACM to the Prime Minister. I think Prince Charles does carry weight, and this is an area where he has a genuine interest.
That's an excellent idea.
So would you remember that?
Yes.
And we'll make a mental note of that. I'm sorry, yes.
Just leading on from the business of planting multitudes of trees, I'd cut back a little bit on that, and I'd make it so that each school, particularly primary schools, planted one tree in memory of Queen Elizabeth II and her reign, her long reign. And with that, perhaps going on with the pamphlets and so forth, something for each student that they could keep. I think all of us have memories of things that we've kept from our childhood, of events that happened, that at the time may not have had so much significance as they do as later on in life, as we recall back to it, as we talk about it to our children and our grandchildren, and wow, Granny, did you do that? Were you really there when Queen Elizabeth went past in the car and you waved your little flag? Yeah, I was there. Wow, that's great. So that kind of thing is good to, if we experienced it, it was so great, wouldn't we like our children and grandchildren to be able to do that as well? That's my thoughts.
It's sort of similar to that idea in the bicentenary, where local councils were handing out medallions. Mayors were going to local primary schools and handing out sort of little medallions for all the primary school kids to mark the bicentenary year. So I know what you mean, and you keep that, and that sort of that nostalgic feeling sort of gets reminded of as the years go by.